You don't need that face. I'm gonna get hot.
Like any. We should get no.
It's rolling all over. That would be funny. What did you just have?
For the bar.
Is it gonna be in presenterville?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is in presenter mode right now.
Well, no. Oh, no, it's not. No, like.
Oh, you mean with like the.
I want to see what's next thing. Can you do that?
I got the orange. Tell me how. Yeah. Oh yeah, that's great. Beans and pigs yesterday. Running around a sheep. Yeah, so. I'm all right. I'm teaching biology. Okay. Nothing too crazy. Volunteer. I haven't finished. Yeah, exactly.
No.
It only works if it's set up like two different books. So the way the projector is, it just copies what it's like. So because it's just one, you guys have to. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. Here's your lines on it.
Great. Is that something you're used to?
Yes.
I'll keep that one for the future.
Well, can you do anything about it?
Not really. It's just the way that they set up the projection in here. Instead of like it acting as a second monitor, it's just copying this one. And you can only use the presenter thing if you have two monitors.
Yeah.
So
There's just one slide that I have notes on that maybe I can steal before I start it. Can everyone see what I'm doing?
yeah. I like it. You know, like take a photo with your phone and leave it that on there?
That would require me to look at my phone. Do you have a pen?
No.
Swear I mentioned. I mentioned the walls. Yeah. Yeah. So it hasn't really caught on. I mean, we're going. So
It's on and also.
are you?
beginning. Yeah. Hi, everyone. Are we good to go? No, no one is introducing me because I declined to be introduced. So, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Laura Ingwell. I'm an assistant professor in the entomology department. And I volunteered to do seminar today because I got to go on a really fun research trip to Timor-Leste, and some people have asked me about it, so I thought I would just share. So there is a little bit of entomology and data, but a lot of pictures about the experience overall. Are there any announcements? Sorry, before I start, I forgot that part. No? Okay, sweet. So this is a grant that I don't remember if Paul Brown found it first or me, but this is kind of it's a seed grant that comes from the College of Engineering at Purdue. So there's the Shaw Family Global Innovation Lab, which is associated with the College of Engineering, and they have a lot of different programs where they're involved in sustainability and development throughout the world. But in particular here, this one is a seed grant. So ideally the funding is for 1 year. And they do this sort of matchmaking where they find people in another country, a lot of like NGO organizations who are working towards one of these sustainability goals set forth by the UN. And they go through a selection process and they pick out proposals that they are interested in funding, and then they bring that to Purdue and they look for expertise to partner with this international group and try to address some questions. And so this came across my desk in I think 2021. And it was in the topic broadly of agriculture and food security. And so there was this problem statement: micro enterprises in Timor-Leste do not have access to locally appropriate technologies to produce low-cost fish feed for use, sorry, there's a typo there, in smallholder aquaculture. So this was put forth by the Catholic Relief Service in Timor-Leste. And so they did a lot of the work actually on the background and the justification. And so I had never heard of Timor-Leste. This was very new to me, but I was excited once I looked it up on Google and found out where the country was. But more broadly, I thought like the research that I'm doing at Purdue could directly impact and help address this question. And so where the background comes from is malnutrition is a serious problem in the country. 50% of children in particular suffer from stunting. So they don't have enough food and enough protein-rich, nutritious food. And so the Catholic Relief Service has been there for many, many years and has worked with communities to develop aquaculture for smallholder farms. And so the way that the program works in the country, it's very community-based. They hire people from Timor and they work in communities to recruit people and train people to grow fish in their backyard, essentially. And it's very household subsistence-based farming. And so they've worked for many years and they have been able to have some success with this. So they have a central hatchery. There's actually 3 distribution centers now within the country. They're all growing this gift strain of tilapia, which is one that's common throughout the world for subsistence aquaculture. And currently they have 119 homes that are participating in this program. So they've already done the work, they have the buy-in, people are doing it, and now they're having problems with the actual fish growth. And so they're looking to sort of optimize the system. And so these are some of their current challenges. Like I mentioned, really slow growth of the fish, inconsistent production. They have very low densities in their ponds, so they're really not maximizing and getting the most nutrition out of all of the work that went into establishing this program. And it goes back to the human health and an inadequate amount of protein in their diets. And so I think Paul emailed me, or I emailed him, I don't know, he's not here today, but so I did have a partner at Purdue that is an expert in the aquaculture and fish nutrition side of things. So that was sort of the little boost of confidence I needed to be able to respond to this. And so Paul Braun is in Forestry and Natural Resources. I've actually never met him in person. Despite working for 2 years with him on this, I have Zoomed with him a few times. But so he has a background in a strong research program in aquaculture nutrition, aquaponics. More recently, he's been working internationally, and he, from my understanding in the aquaculture fisheries world, you know, he takes this really unique approach about aquaculture development in, especially abroad and in developing countries, where there's a very traditional approach to creating these very manufactured and standard pelleted diets where the nutrition is honed in on every single need of the fish, and then trying to distribute these pellets to people who are implementing this. In reality, they're very expensive, they're not attainable, countries don't have access to that. So he was really interested in what's the resource base in country, and how can we calibrate that to meet the nutritional needs of the fish. And so that's where he was excited about the soldier fly idea. And that's where I come in. So if you don't know about soldier flies, I hope you love them by the end. They're my favorite. So this is Hermetia illucens. It's a stratiomyid fly. It's really popular right now, especially in the entomophagy world as a species for protein production. The larvae, well, that's the eggs, right? But when the eggs hatch, the larvae can be reared on organic waste streams. And this is where I get excited. You can really divert waste from the landfill and use it as a resource to produce an economically feasible protein. The casings from the insects themselves are really high in chitin. They also produce just a compost digestate like any other composting process. And it can be used as a soil amendment. Then the protein part themselves, where all the research has been focused and factory style mass production, is around optimizing diets and standardizing diets to get the most protein to use them in feed. And right now that's livestock feed, pet feed. In some countries it goes for dog, cats, and birds, not so much in the US yet. And the adults themselves are very short-lived. They don't bite, they don't sting, they don't transmit any diseases, so they're harmless. And they're pretty easy to raise in captivity so that you can generate a large population. Because of all of the work around the protein side of insect production, we know a lot about their life cycle already, and they've been explored beyond protein as a potential of sort of a bioremediation organism. So their entire life cycle is 44 days, which is fairly quick. Ideally, they grow the best in temperatures from 20 to 40 C and 30 to 90% humidity. You can harvest the digestate or the protein prepupal and pupal around 21 days. And the bioremediation comes in with some of the work looking at how they can break down and reduce mycotoxins and pesticide residues in the organic matter that you're feeding to the larva. They also, when you look at them in the context of recycling manures, they break down E. coli, salmonella, they reduce the presence of that pathogen in those materials. And some work showing that they can alleviate the bioavailability of heavy metals. So this is where I adopted them into my research program and was really interested in how do we take organic waste away from landfill and create them into a more viable and resource. And so you may or may not know, I had one student graduate. This is Katie Terrell on the top left. So when I started as a faculty member, she did her master's with me. And this is where we were really focusing on the application of soldier fly composting on urban farms, because urban farms have a really high input cost in bringing in organic materials and soil amendments on farm. They're situated in a place where there's a lot of food waste. And so I was really excited about that idea of how do we recapture that waste and help build soil health in a more sustainable way for our urban farmers. So she focused more on this side of things. What are the different inputs and feedstocks that we can use to rear these larvae? And now I have a new student starting this semester, Milena Aguila, who's really interested in the byproduct, the frass, the digestate, the chitin. How can we use that in the application of specialty crop production as a soil amendment? And so this project in Timor-Leste was different in that now we're actually looking at the protein side. And so the first thing I did was try to figure out if these flies are in Timor. And so that took a lot of emailing with Stephen and colleagues in us. Well, a few people emailed me back, but so colleagues in Australia went through their collections. Australia is probably the closest continent to the island, which is right here. And so they had some records in their collections of collecting the fly on the island. This is a map I stumbled across more recently. So yes, in theory, they should be there. So this should work, right? I know how to grow them in the lab here. We can just grow them into more. I can teach people, it'll be easy. They're native to the neotropics, but at this point, they're pretty globally distributed because of that utility as a protein source. So they are mass produced in factories all over on very standardized diets. And so going back to those challenges, I thought, oh, soldier flies could be a pretty easy integration here. We can use a local resource, whatever that organic waste material looks like in country. We can capture these flies from the wild. We can teach them how to rear them in captivity. And according to Paul, fish will love them and we can feed them to fish. So we went for it and we developed these objectives. So the first one was to identify low-cost feeding strategies to support the aquaculture farmers in Timor that are participating in the program. Then we wanted to promote different types of feeding practices. So currently in that model, everyone does the same thing. And I will review that as our control. So we wanted to help teach them that they could be creative and innovative and sort of diversify the way that they're feeding these fish. And then we wanted to do some actual research and show them the benefits of research. And so we were comparing different types of feed treatments on farm in collaboration with these growers. And so this obviously relied on participation and a lot of heavy lifting from the CRS partners that are in Timor. So these are the two gentlemen that I got to work with. So this is Mount August, which means like Mr. August. And this is Mount Bevy. So August is, he speaks very good English, has traveled all over. He is originally from the southern coast of Timor, has degrees in agronomy. He was my guide and my translator through most of it, and he has a leadership position within CRS. So he oversees the aquaculture program across the whole country. Bendindo is fairly new, but he works within the locale in particular where the farmers are that we were working with. So he was like our county educator, point person in the country that was servicing the aquaculture farmers in Bikeke where the work was done. And so I worked with both of those individuals on Zoom to teach them how to capture and start to rear soldier flies in preparation for a visit. So our work plan was, first we need to identify farmers who are going to participate. This is the first time ever, according to my CRS partners, that there has been participatory research in Timor. The country is very strongly reliant on aid, foreign aid, and people come in and just say, this is what you do. Here are the fish, here's the feed. We are gonna have to give you all of that and you do that practice. There's not a lot of how do we adopt this to the local environment, local culture, how do we make it more sustainable? And so there was a huge learning curve to teach farmers about what research is like, how important controls are, all sorts of things like that. So we had to get them on board and make sure that they knew what they were signing up for. That we were gonna tell them you have to feed your fish this particular thing and you have to follow that rule to get the data we need. Even if one treatment is dying, that's part of the deal. We're learning from that. So they were able to find 3 farmers fairly close together, and many of them had to construct additional ponds on their farm to be able to do this work. So 5 different feeding treatments we wanted to look at. So they had to build, some of them had to build 5 new ponds to be able to participate. Then we had to make sure, and this was the hardest part, we had to find a nursery that could supply enough fingerlings for us to put 125 fish in 5 ponds at 3 farms all at the same time. And that was nearly impossible, and one of the challenges that we have. We cannot get consistent fish production because there's not a lot of support on that side either. And then lastly was this conduct the in-person training, teach them how to rear the flies and teach them how to do the experimental protocols so that we can evaluate these feedstocks. So here's our treatments. We settled on 5 different feeding treatments. The negative control here is the standard practice that they do in the country. So these are ponds you'll see that are just dug in the ground, like a dirt hole in the backyard. After they prepare the pond, they fill it with manure from livestock. And then they start to put water in the pond. And that manure feeds primary productivity. And then the fish are eating the algae and the microorganisms that are in the pond. And so it's all reliant on primary productivity and that initial input of manure. So that's our control. Our negative controls, we call it. Our positive control is that commercial pellet feed. So that's the government solution right now. We're going to buy commercial pellet feed abroad and we're going to ship it in and somehow get it to these farmers, even though it costs way more than they can afford. But it's been manufactured to be the perfect nutrients that the fish need to grow. Then we implemented these three other ones. So one of the easiest was, and sometimes farmers do this if they have food waste from dinner. So a lot of it's vegetable scraps, like peels from papaya or extra cabbage or extra sweet potato. And they'll throw those scraps into the pond. And either the fish eat them or they get broken down by primary producers and the fish eat that. The second one was maggots. And so that's the soldier flies. So all they're getting for supplemental feed is soldier fly, prepupae, larvae, and prepupae. And then because we were concerned about how much maggot production we could actually establish if we could meet the needs of the fish, we did this split diet where they're getting the same amount of food total, but half the biomass is food waste and half the biomass is flies. So the difference here from the maggot one is they're getting half the number of maggots, the weight of maggots, supplemented with food waste. And so those are the 5 treatments that we settled on. We calibrated the feeding rate based on fish size. So typically they say fish will consume 3% of their body weight. So every month, these farmers are going out and weighing their fish and adjusting the amount of food they're putting in the pond so that it's 3% of what the fish weigh. So by weight, 3% of fish weight for maggot density, 3% of fish weight for food waste. And then, so this is a very long description of the location, but essentially we're doing it in one municipality, Viqueque, and the actual fish rearing part of the experiment is running April through the end of October this year, where we actually got the fingerlings in the pond and now we're measuring the development of those fingerlings. And so some early successes before I got there was that we found 3 farmers. So these are our participating farmers. This is Manuel, Raimundo, and Sebas. And they were aquaculture farmers already. They live very close to each other. They were excited to be a part of the work and willing to install more ponds to participate. And then August was successful at rearing soldier flies. And so I coached him as best I could on setting these like bait traps around. He lives in the city of Dili, which I'll show you in a minute. And so a very heavily, densely populated area. And so he just set these bait traps out in his backyard. And a few days later, he sent me pictures. Look, is this the fly we're looking for? And I'm not a taxonomist, but this is a pretty distinct fly, right? So when I got these pictures, I was like, yes, you found the right thing. This is amazing. So we got the maggots catching just from wild. He never saw the adults or the eggs on it, but the maggots were there. This is my favorite. So Bevy was really struggling. And when I was there, he could not grow them. He was trying and could not get the flies to grow. And a month after I came back, he posted a video on Facebook and friended me to show me that he has a huge bin full of them. So it seems easy, but we all know that like there's situational things. Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. So now both of our CRS affiliates have very strong populations going, and they're helping to supplement what the farmers are doing. Okay, so here's my little tour map starts. Okay, if you don't know where Timor is, this is Northern Australia. Darwin in the Northern Territory is the closest airport. And it's a little less than 2 hours to Timor-Leste, which is, oh my God, now I'm here, eastern half of the island of Timor. The official languages are Portuguese and Tetum. There are 15 national languages in addition to that. So it's very much depending on what municipality, what community you're in, they also speak that original language. They have working languages, though, that include English and Indonesian. And that's because a lot of import-export. They have a very interesting history just in terms of rule. So they were ruled by the Portuguese from the early 1700s until 1975, which is where the Portuguese language comes from. And they declared their independence in 1975, and that didn't last very long. Then Indonesia took over, and they didn't get their own independence until 2002. So if you go around the island, you will see crazy relics of the Portuguese rule, and then crazy statues and relics of the Indonesian rule, and these giant city parks that they constructed, and there's caves in the sides of mountains to hide during war times, and it's very interesting, but they're very, very newly independent country. The population really resides around the coastal region of the island. It's a tropical climate, but they do have this sort of distinct wet season from December to May. And the population is very, very young. So the majority of people in the country are very young in age. So I arrived in Dili, which is the capital and the biggest city on the northern side of the island. And then I drove to Baucau, which is the next central city, and where there's a second major CRS office. And then I drove south to Bikeke, which is where the work was done. So I'm gonna take you on a little tour. So this is Dili when you arrive. I've never been anywhere in Asia, Indonesia, so it's all very new to me. But it was beautiful, lots of palm trees, really hot, nice, whatever, open airport. My hotel was crazy nice. So this is like what I came into and what I was sort of expecting during my trip. Tons of foreign aid workers. Like the hotel was all foreign aid workers that spoke English, none from the United States at all. Australia was the closest, and then other Asian countries. There's no like central trash, you know, which I guess is very common among developing or poor countries. And so in the city, there are lots of little houses, and if people wanted to dispose of their trash, they put it in a wheelbarrow and they walked down the street and dumped it in this like cement holding area. And I think they would come and pick it up occasionally. I was excited because I was looking for flies and maggots, and I was walking by that, like, oh, this is gonna be perfect, right? But the downside is they're on the coast, and all of the trash just is washing out on the beach. And it was sad because it smells like trash, and there's plastic bottles and all of that just going out on the beach. There are farmers right in the city, so there's cows and pigs just roaming around in between the houses and around the trucks, and cats sleeping on roofs. But typical sort of city life, but that was the trash buildup in the water that flushes out of, like, through the canals in the city and out onto the coastline. And of course, like any community, there's like fishing and fruit production, and they go around and pick up coral, and they have these big stacks of dead coral that washes up on the beach all along the boardwalk. But it's like the whole city comes out at night at the end of the day and goes along the beach and eats dinner and hangs out. And so all those little tents are people grilling that fish and cutting open coconuts. And despite all of the trash and everything, everyone comes out and sits and listens to music and dances, and kids are playing, and they just hang around. So it's like a very fun and vibrant scene. And there were these, so in the city, a lot of people speak English. It's, again, the working language. And so there were these little school girls who came and interviewed me. They like ran down the street and wanted to ask me what it meant to be successful, or some very deep question. And I was like, what? And they had their phones and they recorded all my answers and took pictures with me. So that was interesting, and they were very sweet. It was their homework. They had to go around and interview people. But then we left Dili. So I spent one night there, and then we got in a truck and we drove to Baucau, which was further east, still along the coast. And once you get out of the city and the trash and the people, it's just beautiful. Blue waters, lots of ships. They have like a tiered rice paddy sort of system for farming. And so these are like different paddocks of rice fields, and water buffalo. In a lot of the villages, they still have dowries and use water buffalo for dowries. And so the water buffalo were grazing in the fields. That was cool to see. These are some of the more traditional types of housing Not very many communities still utilize these and live in these, but some of them do that we passed by. And most of the way they were still building the road or fixing the road, which I guess is common, right? So we were in a 4-wheel drive truck, and a lot of times when we had to stop and wait for them to remove boulders or finish with excavating and digging so that we could get by. There were Caterpillar things, but for the most part, so it was rare to have big equipment. For the most part, it was lines of men and rocks and buckets that they were moving buckets of cement down the row. And they would have hard hats on, but they would be barefoot. But that's how they were building roads. And so because of the wet season, they have landslides. And so the roads are constantly washed away, and you don't know how long it will be before you can get through sometimes, but we made it. And then this is Baucau. This was our first stop. This is the other CRS office in Baucau. So in this beautiful old house, lots of fruit, tropical fruits along the way. So papaya, star fruit, coconut. Most of the forest along the mountainside has been planted with teak, because at one point during their colonization, someone told them that teak is a valuable wood and you should plant it. Teak is also highly invasive and nothing can grow underneath it. So their mountains are now like monoculture stands of teak that people go in and cut up, cut down and then cut into small pieces, because everyone still cooks by fire with wood. And so all along the road, you'll see like kids out harvesting and making logs, piles of firewood, and then they bring it into the city and people buy that to cook their meals. This in this city here, so this is a swimming pool that they have, like a public pool for people to use in Baucau. This was what the outside of the hotel looked like that I stayed in Baucau, so not as fancy. Those are my accommodations. So I have 2 little double beds, a toilet that did flush and running water, and a little shower head that just all sort of drained on the floor. I spent 1 night there, and then we drove to Vikeke, which is where the farmers were. And so very beautiful tropical mountains, lots of flowing water. These snails, which are crazy and totally defoliating the papaya, just everywhere. And the dogs eat them, and the cows and pigs step on them. Lots of fruit and fruit stands along the roadside. More bananas, since there's bananas at every single meal. Sometimes they're like ripe and fresh, and sometimes they're cooked. There's one little patch of monkeys, which is like, I guess, a big tourist attraction in this little mangrove along the way. So we had to stop and visit the monkeys. They wanted me to see the monkeys. But otherwise, like there's not, I was expecting more, like I've been to Costa Rica and Panama, I was expecting more wildlife. There's not. It was like the farm animals that they have and the slugs. There's not a lot of birds. There's not a lot of other animals. It really surprised me. And this is what so in Vikeke, they did still have a hotel, but it's like a single-story house that has like 4 bedrooms in it and a common kitchen. And this is where we stayed for 2 nights when I was there. And there were geckos in the room here. That was exciting, but they're not a native gecko. And this is what the bathroom accommodations are like here. So there is still a flushing toilet, but it doesn't always flush. So this is a basin of water that you have to dump into the pool to help flush the toilet. No toilet seats. The culture is very welcoming, but also very different. So I was the only female on the whole trip that was part of the research group. There were females that fed us. And so like the wives and daughters at the hotel, they would come out and serve us breakfast in the morning, but they wouldn't eat with us. And then they would come back and clean it up. And this is where we did the training. So this is one of the houses of the farmers that are participating. And this farmer, Raimundo, is the one who hosted the training. Again, he had his wife and his daughter were there. His wife would occasionally talk to me if I went, but she would just cook the food and then go away, and then cook the food for the next meal and go away. And they cooked food constantly. This was a big deal for them to host people. And so there was like breakfast and snack and lunch and snack and dinner. And it was very welcoming. This is what it's more like for when you move out of the cities completely and are in the villages. This is what the restroom accommodation is like. And being the only woman, this was a bit alarming for me, and I really wasn't sure how to deal with this. So It was very new, and everywhere I've traveled, I've never experienced this. So this is just like a cement walls with a tin roof that's built outside of the home, sort of in the backyard. There's water trickling down like from the mountains that's diverted into a holding tank. And so in this case, there's a cement holding tank that's filled with water that's just trickling in from a hose that's been routed from the mountains. This one just has like trash cans full of water. And there are fish swimming around in there. And then there's like a toilet clearly mounted on the ground and a bucket. And that's what you wipe with when you're done going to the bathroom. And that's it. And a little door that you push open and shut when you're done in there, or not done. You lock or anything like that. So it was a bit of a culture shock, very interesting. But I got used to it very quickly because it was my only option. And these are nice, like these are well off, nice facilities for the farmers that we were working with. This is a view from their house. So they are right on the top of the mountain in town, and that is what the cemetery looks like, very brightly colored, and it's all above ground like you would, like I've seen in New Orleans. Everything is above ground. And so we were here for 2 days hosting this training to prepare them to do the research. And so again, this is my CRS colleague, this is Bendigo, this is August, this is Raimundo, who's the hosting farmer. We're at his house. This, and, oh, I get confused. I think he's back here, are my other farmers, 3 farmers. But they brought all their friends because they were so excited. So there's 2 gentlemen. This gentleman works at the hatchery that's in town. There's no fish in it right now, but I'll show you a picture of all the ponds. So they have the capacity to have a hatchery, but it's empty. But that's where he came from. He is an extension, like his title is an extension educator in this municipality. He's new and he's retiring. So they were going through this transition, so both of them came. And then some of the others are like the sons of the farmers or neighbors who also have fish ponds, so they wanted to see what this was all about. And here's the little bucket of the firewood, the teak firewood that they're bringing home for dinner. Okay, so in some ways, this is so similar to what we do. We had a giant Post-it whiteboard and markers, and we put chairs, and this is their front living room at their home, and this is their kitchen or dining room where they served us meals. And so we all sat around in there and we mapped out, told them the importance of what we were doing, the questions we were asking, how to draw out the life cycle of soldier flies. I had to say it in English, and then August had to translate it into Tune, but they also speak their own dialects. So there was a lot of back and forth about what are you really trying to say? So I would say something and patiently wait, and then August would translate it, and he'd throw in a joke, and they'd all start laughing and look at me. And then I would laugh, and then the second day they're like, why does she always laugh? She doesn't even know what we're saying. And I was like, I don't know, because you're all laughing. What am I supposed to do? But none of them spoke English. None. There was only my 2 people from CRS who did. And so I mapped out the life cycle of the soldier fly, tried to explain it to them. They had a lot of the same questions that other people would, like, are the flies going to hurt us? Do we have to worry about it? How close to the house should we put them? And then they asked all sorts of crazy questions. Can we feed them this? Can we feed them that? You know, right away they started thinking about, well, what else? They butcher a lot of livestock, and right now they like put all the innards and blood in a bag and they hang it outside. Can we give that to the flies? Will they eat that? So it was cool to see them starting to think about things. But at first, when we pulled out the bucket, so August had some from what he started, they were like, "Ooh, I'm not gonna touch this." Right? And so I'm like, stick your hand in there, just figure it out. And it took a lot of coaxing about, you know, it smells weird. And August, it played around and he made this like fermented juice that he put on some of the debris that really got them attracted. And so then we were all excited, what is this fermented juice? And they eventually got into it, but it smelled real funky. So there was a little bit of a learning curve. And so in preparation, and I brought some supplies with us, so we eventually got them to feel comfortable with and hold the flies. And each of them had built ahead of time like a screen shelter, essentially to rear the flies in. I brought some pop-up cages to try to at least condense what few adults they had at first to get them to lay in the same place. But then when we walked away from this training, each of those farmers were able to take a cage with pupae or adults starting to emerge that they could put in here. They also had a bin with larvae developing in it, and they had a bait trap to try to catch more from the wild with cards for the adults to lay eggs on. And then we gave them some organic feedstocks and some of that fermented juice to try to get them started. So they all got their little like take-home package at the end of the first day. And that first night, we did put out some of those buckets and bait traps, hoping to catch some eggs by the time we came back the next day, which we did not. This is in their backyard and where we were cutting up some fruits, a lot of papaya to put into the bait trap. And then that's what their shelters looked like that they had built just from emailing back and forth and sort of what supplies they had around town to be able to do this. And then the second day, we really got out into the ponds more. And so some of them had active ponds already going. So we went and we looked at those ponds. This again is relying on primary productivity. Some of them have lily pads or other plants growing in there. The fish can nibble on the roots. One thing, so a lot of them have livestock that just wander around. And one thing, when we were like telling them about how strict they had to be with feeding the fish, they were like, what do we do if a cow comes and poops in the pond? We didn't put that food in, now there's food in there, what do we do? So then I introduced them to demonic intrusion and I was like, you can't do anything about it, it's okay. Like, you're not gonna be able to measure everything. It'll get washed out. And yeah, this is what the ponds, so this is what the ponds look like. So it's literally them using a shovel and digging into the side of the hill and sort of working with the flow of water because they want to be able to control when the water goes into the pond and then when it's time to harvest the fish when the water goes out of the pond. But they're all dug into the sides of the landscape. And then we, oh wait, does this one show? No. Then we had to teach them how to measure their ponds and make sure that we had the same size and the stocking rate of the fish according to the size of the pond. So they cut down a tree and estimated that it was, I don't know, a meter thick, and then walked around as a team. We went to each farm and all of us walked around the ponds and we measured the size of the ponds so that we could make sure we were stocking them correctly. They do worry about people coming and stealing the fish in their ponds, and so they put these poles all over in here so that someone can't just throw a net in and pull the fish out. They would get stuck on their twigs. And we try to train them to feed the fish in the corner where there's like a basket. So this little grouping here is just twigs all put in the corner, and every time they feed the fish, they'll put it in that same spot so the fish get trained to come over and eat, and it's easier to catch them and weigh them and watch their progress. Okay. And then this was really fun. See, Gabby's holding this cookie container. We had to teach them about randomization. And they couldn't say like, this is my favorite pond, this is the big pond, I want this feed treatment in this pond. We had to explain to them what it means to randomize, and that we were going to decide through this process of picking a number out of a bucket, which feeding treatment goes in each pond. And then they insisted that I helped and picked numbers to assign each of the ponds when we were there. But that was really cool because that was something I wouldn't have thought about trying to explain to a farmer. So that's them laughing and making fun of making me pick a number. This is what the fish look like. See, there's some little baby ones. So some of the ponds do get fish colonizing them on their own. And so they were worried about that too, influencing the populations within the ponds. And I figured the whole thing was a success because at the end, they invited me to try this cultural tradition they have that is very famous with the elders in the community. And so I'm going to try to explain this to the best. I had to look online because I don't remember the names of everything. So this is a sirrat leaf. And you take this white powder, in this plastic bag is lime powder, and you take this leaf and you hold it out in your hand and you sprinkle this lime powder on it. Then you take one of these nuts, they're rock hard. It's usually a betel nut or a palm nut, and you put the nut inside the leaf, and then you roll it up like a little present, and you tuck it in your cheek, and you chew on it, and you suck on the juice that comes out of it. It's very, very bitter, but it's like a narcotic. That's what it says online, it's like a narcotic. I didn't have very much of it. But you chew on it, and it's kind of like, it was kind of like chewing tobacco, but different. But as the juices infiltrate the nut, all the red dye and the nut comes out. So your teeth, your tongue, your mouth is just stained bright red. And so all the elders that were at this training just, this is how I got curious. They just had really red teeth and were spitting this red all day long. So the last day, right before I left, they said, here, you need to try this. This is what they've been doing. And they all just stood there and watched. As and I put it in my mouth. So it was interesting. I did not chew it very long. But I mean, if you look online about this, it goes back like to 10,000 BC. Archaeologists find this in caves. Like it's a very, very old tradition. So that was cool. Anyways, okay, so we ended up with 5 ponds at each location. Each pond was stocked with 125 fingerlings. They were all fed with pelleted food for the first 2 weeks. Then they started implementing our 5 feeding treatments. And on a monthly basis, we're collecting growth data. And so this is what it looks like. We provided them with a scale. We taught them how to use the scale, how to tare it, how to weigh all of these things. And so this is what their different feeding treatments look like. This is maggots and food waste. Obviously, this is the pelleted feed, which we have, like CRS has to ration it out to them. So on a monthly basis, they get how much they need for the month. It's very expensive. This is just what the maggots look like and food waste. And then this is our primary productivity control. So they're not adding anything into the pond. And then they have to go out and collect the data and measure the fish growth. So this requires them to physically get in the pond and use these nets. At first, we wanted to pull up all the fish. That's impossible. So then they started doing a subset of fish. And here are our 3 farmers after the first weighing and measuring of the fish. They're very excited. And so we're measuring length of fish and weight of fish on a monthly basis. And I believe they're doing 30 fish per pond. And this is the whole community comes together. They all do it on the same day and they go from one farm to the next. Some of them are recording data. Some of them, this is at Raimundo's farm. So he's in there digging the fish out with the net to get their subsample and get enough recorded. And so after 3 months of observations, we have I think, very exciting data. And so what we're looking at here is the fish weight at month 3, comparing those different treatments. This is that pelleted feed, which we would assume to be the optimized feeding rates. And this is our maggots. So they're performing equally well. In this situation, we have reduced growth, but remember, they're only getting half the amount of maggots supplemented with food waste. And this is what it looks like across time. So this is exciting to see that they're growing at a much faster rate and that the maggot treatment is keeping up with that commercial pellet food. And then if we look at length, which is the other metric that we're measuring, we see the same thing, that the maggots alone are performing as well as that pellet feed. And again, that length across time. So this is very exciting for us to be able to show them, well, first of all, they're performing similarly to the pelleted diet, which is really great. The food waste with the BSF is not performing as well, but again, that's because they're not really getting all that nutrient they need. They're only getting half the amount of flies. And again, reinforcing that just relying on primary productivity is really not optimizing the growth of those fish. But this is the most exciting thing. Every time they go and collect data, they show me pictures of their colonies. And so the farmers are finally starting to get their colonies going and starting to produce their own flies. And that was a big hurdle. It took a long time. They were able to rear to adults, but then they weren't getting eggs laid. They had ant infestation and the ants were coming and eating the adults. So they had to figure out, well, how do we keep ants out of the system? We have some limitations like everyone does, right? But we are adapting to them. Some of the farmers don't always follow what they're supposed to do. But I think the most interesting part is the opportunity for expansion. We've demonstrated that the flies are present in the country, that they have the resources to rear them in captivity. They also have the resources to expand the fish industry if they could utilize them. So this is an example of what the fish ponds at the municipality look like. And there's 2 more behind me in this picture. They're all empty because they don't have the resources to feed the fingerlings. So if they can develop the food, they can stock these ponds and provide more fingerlings for the community. Again, this is the pond. So one pond had some of the like big koi goldfish in it that were feeding on the roots of this plant, but no fingerling production happening because they don't have the resources. So that is it. I have a few token insect pictures at the end because I did see other insects. But, yeah, so it's really exciting. So end of October, we'll have the last, I think, count and fish harvest, and then we'll see how everything turns out. And I hope that we can continue to support them to rear flies. But the shop funding is 1 year. We got an extension because of COVID and travel to get over there. But that's almost gone and done. And that's it. There's my other bugs if you want to see other bugs. Matt. Nice.
What are the black soldier flies being reared on?
What were they being reared on?
Yeah.
So we were teaching the farmers to rear them on whatever organic waste they have. For the most part, it was in the community in Viqueque. That's papaya, sweet potato, regular potato, and plantain. And it's usually like not the fruit, right? But the outside peels. Banana leaves and papaya leaves too that fall off the tree they put in there. They did have a small vegetable garden, but it's not like they have access from the garden. So it was a lot of peelings from food. A little bit of food waste from actually post-cooking it. And then some of them, I believe, have started incorporating some of the animal material after slaughtering. In the city, August has like his own whole production of stuff, including he grows mushrooms and sells them. But so he has a lot of avocado too. So it was a lot of like avocado meal, avocado, like overripe ones and peels and things like that. Taylor first.
I have a two-part question. Are all three of your initial farmers still showing enthusiasm for this work? Are they wanting to continue it past the grant funding? And since they're coming together as a community to help with the measurements, are more people wanting to attempt this feed style?
I don't know much of that because I haven't talked to the farmers since I was there. But when I was there, they were very excited. And so other people that were at that training were asking about it and wanting to go home and try to catch the flies. And then some of them, even according to translation, were talking about just developing a business for flies to help supplement that. So they were like, the enthusiasm was exciting. They were very encouraged. Since I've left, I don't know. I do, it's hard to talk to people into more. Like we meet at 8 p.m. or 7:30 p.m. my time, which is like 7:30 or 8 a.m. their time. Sometimes we miss each other, sometimes we don't. So we have monthly meetings, but the farmers are still interested in participating and they're excited to see that the fish are growing better. They're kind of torn between, like they want access to the pellet, but they just don't have it and it's really expensive. And so I know that at first they were a bit hesitant because they were having problems getting the fly colonies going, but that's been improving.
Use those research methods, having that type of errors.
Yeah, yeah. Christian.
So is there, did somebody take notes on these things while you were there? Is there a way for these CRS individuals to make some of this into some extension materials that will outlive you, that you can
Hopefully
translate?
Yeah, hopefully. So I do have an extension bulletin on soldier fly rearing, which I gave to them and they were translating it for their farmers. And I gave them, we walked through, like we created a document together about the rearing, feeding rates and things like that. And so CRS is working on translating that. I haven't seen the translated versions yet, but yeah, so I hope it lives beyond me. That August is like he's very entrepreneurial and excited about it. So I think he will keep it going.
So how do you convince them to have control treatments?
Well, part of that is because CRS paid for the pond construction and paid for the fingerlings in the pond. So these 5 ponds, they had to give up the land on their farm, but the Shaw grant helped us to give them the funds to dig the ponds and we bought all the fingerlings in all of the ponds.
So what's the litter rate there?
Oh my God, I read that when it's like 46%.
Among the farmers?
Among the farmers, I have no idea.
You say the whole country.
The literacy rate, like on the Wikipedia of the country report, is 46%. It's definitely in the city, like I said, and everyone has a cell phone. Like most people are barefoot and walking everywhere, and there's no running water and electricity is sparse, but everyone had a cell phone. Every little kid walking to school, everyone had a cell phone, which I thought was really weird, but I guess normal now. So they're definitely connected somehow. So I don't know how that literacy rate may be increasing with younger people. No.
So for your treatments, you mentioned that you did it by fish weight. How did that handle the negative control? Because it sounded like you add the manure at the start and then you don't do anything with it, so.
Yeah, so they're not getting any supplemental feed at all.
So was there any method, like, did you try and sort of estimate the amount of manure to input at the start, or?
Actually, all of the ponds got the same amount of manure, regardless.
Okay.
And so that was really, really at a disadvantage, but it's representing the current practices.
Yeah, makes sense.
So for some of those other treatments to perform as equally poor as that control is also interesting, right? They're not getting much of a benefit of just throwing in their food scraps.
So was there any standardization of the manure input?
I think so.
Okay.
I wasn't there for that, but they do they have a certain depth that they put in each pond.
This is running through dry season, right?
Yes, I was there at the end of the wet season. The wet season is December. Well, the wet season is, what did I say? December to May. And I was there in March. So towards the end of the wet season.
But the actual growth.
Is mostly in the dry, yeah.
Oh, so they had mostly farming in the dry season.
No, so the fish, they'll continuously do them. They'll restock them, but we started this it would be like the onset of the dry season.
I'm just wondering whether it was part of the cake
Yeah.
in wet season versus dry.
Trying to think, I read a paper about that sort of seasonality and fluctuation, and their populations tend to peak during the wet season. And when you get in the middle of the dry season, there's not resources. And so it would be interesting if you're supplying that resource, if you could keep them going, which is what I was hoping. But they were also trying to catch them and establish it during that dry part.
So with the colonies, I'm thinking like how valuable these would be, like for the growers, like what's like the worst case scenario with the flies? Like, do they have any enemies or like things you have to worry about when they're maintaining them? Because I can see them going really great and then here's the conditions. Do they have like pathogens or?
So that's what I've been worried about keeping my own colony here for a while. I haven't come across anything in the, it's just a matter of time, right? But right now I haven't come across anything in terms of pathogens. What I am experiencing in my own colony is a little beetle, a little blue beetle. Doesn't help me ID the beetle. Anyways, I have a predatory beetle that has gotten into my colony in eel. We pull them out, like the colony's okay, but it's definitely declined. I also just compost them with them in my backyard, and like it goes in waves when there's like a ton of other things in there, and then the flies take over. And so there's a very fine balance, and this was hard to explain to the farmers as well, because they were very concerned about the smell, and a lot of this was close to their house. There's a very fine balance in terms of the rate at which you're feeding them and the rate at which they're eating. Like if you put excessive amounts of food in that habitat, then you start to get like really gross bacteria colonizing and other insects. If you watch them and feed them every day and sort of feed at the rate that they're eating, then nothing can compete because they go through the material so quickly. And so that was a hard thing to train them to, and something I'm still trying to figure out in my own colony, like what is just the right level of feeding that they're the only organism thriving in that, and you don't get these smelly bacteria and other insects and stuff that are colonizing it. But,
in the colonies we have here, you organize them by date that they were harvested so that they're relatively separate in terms of like how old they are. Were they doing something similar there? Like keeping them separate, or did they just have like a couple bins that they had all the larvae?
So when we left, they only had 3 bins that they could rear larvae in that we had provided. And so that was what I was trying, like I tried to encourage them to do it in this sort of cohort so that all of the reproduction and age is fairly similar within a bin and then stagger to the next one. In reality, like I don't know what that looks like because they're probably getting wild individuals colonizing. So I don't know how clean and synchronized they can keep that, but that was the practice that I was encouraging. But at the same time, when they go to feed them, like in a commercial situation where the flies are being reared for protein on this very homogenized and standard diet, it's like a small grain diet, and you can just sift the bugs right out. As soon as you start feeding them this heterogeneous mixture and lots of water, it all gets stuck together. And you can spend hours picking out each larva. So I told them, you can look at the behavior, and when they feed, they move up to the surface and they'll aggregate around whatever that new food is that you put in. And then when there's not a lot of food or they're not feeding, they go down to the bottom. So I encourage them that when you're going to be harvesting for your fish, put in a piece of food in the corner. The maggots will move over to that, and you can have some of that food debris. They're not doing, you know, like clean protein, and just scoop out a handful of that. So they're getting a little bit of that digestate and undigested food along with the maggots when they're feeding the fish. Kind of messy. Feasible for a farmer. Yeah.
Have you ever made a cost comparison between just getting the pellet versus having this do this thing?
No, I have not.
Intensive versus what they need to set this up?
Yeah, no, we have not done the economics on that.
Which, I mean, would it not be more lucrative for them to know that it's so cost effective, let's say?
Yeah, that would probably be encouraging to them. Although the way it works right now, it's like the NGO gives them. They just rely on the aid. So you have to find an NGO that will buy the feed that will then distribute it to them. We're trying to build that sort of self-reliance, so it's not all aid-based. They were very excited about the potential when I was there. And they were asking, can we feed it to our chickens? Can we feed it to our pigs? What else can we do with these flies? So I hope that that continues. I would love to try to like work with CRS and get it across more municipalities in the country, but I don't know what that resource would look like. Yeah.
So it sounds like there's a lot of excitement, assuming that the black soldier fly industry takes off. Is there a risk that they start sort of mining their natural plant biomass for feedstock?
I don't think so. There's already that sort of industry side, and once you get them in captivity, they're so easy to keep breeding. There's not a lot of that like wild harvesting and mining. Unless we get into the concern about the genetic variation, then I can see maybe more of that. But the insect feed side is so far behind on that. Like they're just starting to talk about the fact that there's like very, very, very little diversity within crickets and mealworms that we're growing protein on, but they're not actually moving on that and trying to do anything about it yet. They're just at the talking about the problem that could cause. Okay.
When you were feeding the maggots, did you notice there was like a surplus of the pellet food that they just like could stockpile, or were you using all of the pellet food they were rationing?
So the maggots aren't getting the pellet food.
No, I'm
Oh,
thinking, like,
the
they're
fish.
feeding the fish.
I don't know, because I was out of country by the time I started doing that. I know they were concerned about it though, and talking about how they were gonna like pre-weigh every day's feed in a small bag and give it to the farmer and say, this is the bag you do each day, to make sure that they were following the guidelines. They were nervous they were gonna like throw it all in hopes of getting big fish, but they haven't talked about that in our meetings, so I don't know how much that's true. Okay. I don't know, don't ask. Well, this I know. Well, actually, I should know. Okay, so this is in the farmer's garden, and this is the bean plant, and it's black aphids, which is, I should know, it's like a bean aphid, I'm sure. This was embarrassing, because they're like, we have all these aphids, and you work on vegetables. What do we do? And I was like, these are green beans and black aphids. I should know this. It can't be the same aphid, but it probably is. I was like, do you have wasps around here? Lady females? I don't know. I have no idea what this is. That looks like a kudzu bug type thing.
Yeah, that's would be my.
Yeah, I'm not a taxon.
That's an eggplant.
It's an eggplant, yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And then there's a video on here. Okay, this is on basil, and obviously it's a leaf miner. I don't know leaf miner. But
Very
it's
nice.
a basil plant on the patio at the,
Very nice.
and then
It's just a random guess. They're all
these
very
are,
nice.
these are assassin bugs that I was excited about. It's really blurry. I also learned I'm very bad at taking pictures. But yeah,
Cool.
I didn't really
Thank
pay
you.
attention.
Have a bunch of messages in the chat.
Ah, thank you. I forgot. Branson, where you at on that?
Okay.
No questions. A lot of those are my students or ex-students. Oh, Paul Brown is here. Yay. There he is. Okay. You all should look at the Shaw Seed grants because it's been a good experience. So look at them, see if there's anybody. Can I close this?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Pictures of bathrooms.
No, stop.